The throne room of the Vexery Dominion stretched for nearly a kilometer, and every surface gleamed with gold and precious stones that had been stolen from 100 conquered worlds. Queen Sithara sat upon her massive throne, her serpentine body coiled beneath her as she watched the delegation from Earth approach with obvious disgust on her scaled face. The humans walked in a neat line, their ambassador leading the way with careful steps, and behind him came advisors and assistants who tried not to show their fear. At the very back of the group walked a man who made no sound at all. His name was Yoon Jae-won, and he served as a diplomatic attaché according to his official documents. Though his real purpose was something far more dangerous. He was 37 years old, with a calm face that revealed nothing, and he moved through the throne room with his eyes taking in every detail around him. The guards stood in pairs at each doorway, and their weapons hummed with energy that he recognized as plasma-based technology. The advisors who clustered near the throne whispered to each other constantly, and Jae-won watched their lips move with careful attention. So these are the famous humans. Queen Sithara spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. The species that believes it deserves a place among the stars. Ambassador Chun bowed respectfully and began his prepared greeting, speaking of friendship and cooperation between their peoples. The queen listened with a mocking smile on her face, her four eyes blinking in sequence as she studied each human in turn. When her gaze fell upon Jae-won, she noticed something unusual about him. "You there," she called out, pointing one clawed finger in his direction. "The one at the back who hides behind the others, why do you not speak?" Ambassador Chun stepped forward quickly and explained that Mr. Yoon communicated through other means that he was a valued member of their delegation. Despite this difference. Despite this difference? The queen repeated with cruel amusement in her voice. "You bring a broken creature to my court and expect me to take your species seriously?" Laughter rippled through the assembled Vexery nobles, a hissing sound that filled the throne room with contempt. Jae-won stood perfectly still and showed no reaction to their mockery, though his eyes continued to move across the room with quiet purpose. He watched a guard near the eastern door speak into a communication device, and he read the words on those alien lips with practiced skill. "The specimens are secured in Vault 7. No changes to report." The specimens. Jae-won felt his heart beat faster, but his face remained as calm as stone. "Perhaps we should examine this silent human," the queen suggested with dark humor. "My scientists would love to study such a defect, to understand why some humans cannot master even the basic skill of speech." "Your Majesty," Ambassador Chun said carefully, "Mr. Yoon's condition is not a defect, and many humans throughout our history have communicated without spoken words." "How fascinating," the queen replied in a tone that suggested she found it anything but fascinating. "A species so primitive that some of its members cannot even speak. And yet you come to my throne room asking for trade agreements and alliance." She waved one hand dismissively and told them that quarters had been prepared for the delegation, that they would discuss terms tomorrow after she had time to consider whether humans were worth her attention at Alice. The delegation was led away by Vexery servants. Jae-won walked at the same steady pace as before, his silence now feeling like armor against the whispers and stares that followed them. The quarters they were given were luxurious by any standard, with soft beds and beautiful artwork and windows that looked out over the capital city of the Vexery homeworld. But Jae-won ignored all of this beauty as he moved to the window and looked down at the palace below. Somewhere in this massive structure, in a place called Vault 7, there were people waiting for rescue 6 months ago. A colony ship called the Morning Star had vanished during its journey to a new settlement world, and 231 people had disappeared with its intelligence. Reports had suggested that the Vexery were responsible, that they had captured the ship and taken the survivors as specimens for their biological research programs. Among those survivors were 47 children. Jae-won turned away from the window and met the eyes of Dr. Kang Soo-min, who had entered the room quietly behind him. She was the delegation's medical officer, according to her documents. But like Jae-won, her real purpose was something else entirely. He raised his hands and began to sign, his fingers moving in the precise patterns of Korean Sign Language. Vault 7, he told her without making a sound. They are in Vault 7, and we have less time than we thought. Soo-min nodded and signed back. I will find a way to access the palace systems tonight. And we need the security codes. The Queen wants to see me tomorrow, Jae-won replied with his hands. She thinks I am weak and broken, and I will let her keep believing that. Outside the window, the alien sun was setting over a world that had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. The Vexery believed they were the masters of all they surveyed, that no force could challenge their power or their cruelty. They had never encountered a human like Yoon Jae-won before that night. After the rest of the delegation had fallen asleep, Jae-won sat alone in the darkness and composed an encrypted message on a device hidden within his belongings. The message traveled through secure channels across the vast distance of space, reaching a military installation on the far side of Earth's territory. It contained only a few words, but those words would set everything in motion. Confirmed. The message read, "They have them, and 47 human children are in the lower vaults. Beginning Phase 2 immediately." In the throne room far above, Queen Cythera slept peacefully, dreaming of the power she held over countless worlds. She had no idea that the silent human she had mocked was about to teach her a lesson about the true nature of humanity. Some voices do not need words to be heard, and some silences hide storms that can shake the foundations of empires. The morning came with pale purple light that filtered through the windows of the human quarters. And Jae-won had not slept at all. He sat on the edge of his bed and reviewed the information he had gathered during the previous day, turning each detail over in his mind like pieces of a puzzle. The guards changed shifts every 6 hours, and the security codes were spoken aloud by careless soldiers who never imagined that anyone could read their alien lips. He had counted 47 guards in the throne room alone, and he had memorized the location of every door and corridor they had passed through. 15 years of special forces training had taught him how to observe without being noticed, how to gather intelligence in hostile territory while appearing harmless and weak. His silence, which others saw as a disability, had become his greatest weapon in the field. Dr. Kang Soo-min entered his room without knocking, her face tight with urgency as she closed the door behind her. "I accessed their medical database last night," she signed quickly. "The children are alive, but they are being used for experiments, and the Vexery are studying human biology to find weaknesses they can exploit." Jae-won felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his expression calm as he signed back. "How much time do we have before we can extract them?" "The ship is in position and waiting for our signal," Soo-min replied. "But there is a problem, and the Queen has announced a ceremony for tomorrow." She paused and her hands trembled slightly before she continued. "She plans to display one of the children in front of the entire court, to show the galaxy how primitive and inferior humans truly are." Jae-won stood up slowly, and something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes for just a moment. "Then we move tonight," he signed with absolute certainty in every gesture. "We cannot let that happen." A knock at the door interrupted them, and a Vexery servant entered with a message from the Queen. Her Majesty requested the presence of the silent human in her private chambers, the servant announced. As she wished to study this curious specimen more closely, Ambassador Chen protested that such a meeting was highly irregular. But Jae-won raised one hand to silence him. He would go, he indicated through gestures, and he would give the Queen exactly what she expected to see. Walk to the Queen's private chambers took him through corridors he had not seen before, and his eyes absorbed every detail of the root guard. Spoke freely as he passed, assuming that a silent human could not possibly understand their language, could not possibly be reading every word that formed on their lips. The specimens in Vault 7 are restless today, one guard mentioned to another. The small ones keep crying for their parents. Let them cry, the other guard laughed. Tomorrow one of them will be famous across the galaxy, and the Queen will show everyone what pathetic creatures these humans truly are. J1 walked on with no change in his expression, but inside his mind, he was updating his mental map with every turn and every doorway. Queen Sithara waited for him in a chamber filled with treasures from conquered worlds, and she reclined on a couch made from the bones of some massive creature. "Come closer, little human," she commanded with amusement in her voice. "I want to examine the one who cannot speak." J1 approached with careful steps, keeping his posture humble and his eyes downcast. "My scientists tell me that humans who cannot speak are considered damaged among your kind," the Queen said as she circled around him like a predator examining prey. "Is this true, Silent One?" He gave a small nod, playing the role she expected him to play. "How sad for you," she continued with false sympathy. "To be born broken in a species that is already so inferior. It must be a terrible burden to carry." She reached out and lifted his chin with one clawed finger, forcing him to meet her 4 gleaming eyes. "Perhaps I should add you to my collection," she whispered. "A silent human would make an interesting specimen, and my scientists could learn much from studying your defective brain." J1 let fear show on his face, the fear she wanted to see. While his ears caught every word spoken by the guards outside the chamber door, Vault 7 access code changed this morning, one guard reported to another. "New code is 7-7-3-9-Alpha. The Queen released him with a laugh and told him to return to his quarters, that she would decide his fate after tomorrow's ceremony. As J1 walked back through the corridors, he allowed himself a small smile that no one could see. She had summoned him to mock him and intimidate him, but instead she had given him exactly what he needed. He now knew the route to the private chambers, the location of the guard stations, and the new access code for Vault 7. That evening, the human delegation gathered for dinner in their quarters, and Ambassador Chun expressed his concerns about the Queen's interest in J1. "She sees him as a curiosity," the ambassador worried. "We should send him back to the ship for his own safety." J1 shook his head firmly and signed to Su Min, who translated for the others. "I am exactly where I need to be." She spoke his words aloud. "Please trust me, Ambassador, and everything will become clear very soon." After the others had gone to sleep, J1 and Su Min met in the darkness of his room. "The access code is 7-7-9-Alpha, he signed. "The vault is 3 levels below the throne room, and I have memorized the route. The signal jammer is ready," Su Min replied. "Once I activate it, you will have approximately 15 minutes before they restore communications." J1 nodded and began to prepare his equipment, pulling hidden items from his luggage that had passed through Vexery security without detection. The diplomatic attach was about to become something else entirely, and the silent man was about to make more noise than this palace had ever heard. Somewhere below them, 47 children waited in the darkness of Vault 7, not knowing that rescue was coming tomorrow. Queen Sithara planned to display one of those children as a trophy, as proof of human weakness and inferiority. She would never get that chance. The palace corridors fell into darkness as the night cycle began, and J1 moved through the shadows like smoke drifting on still air. Wore black clothing that absorbed the faint light from the emergency panels on the walls, and his footsteps made no sound on the polished stone floors. 15 years of training had taught him how to control every movement of his body, how to become invisible in plain sight, how to turn silence into a deadly art. 2 guards stood at the first checkpoint, Their backs turned toward him as they complained about the boring duty they had been assigned. J1 approached from behind with the patience of falling snow, and his hands moved faster than their eyes could. Follow the first guard. Collapsed without a sound as precise pressure was applied to the nerve cluster at the base of his skull. Second guard turned at the slight noise, but J1 was already there. And a moment later, both aliens lay unconscious on the floor. He dragged their bodies into a storage alcove and continued on his path toward the lower levels. In the delegation quarters far above, Dr. Kang Soo-min sat at a medical terminal and typed commands with steady fingers. Supposed purpose was to run diagnostic tests on the delegation's health. But the real purpose was something far more important. She had spent 3 days planting hidden programs in the palace computer system. And now those programs were about to activate with one final keystroke. She triggered a cascading series of medical alerts throughout the palace. Alarms began to sound in the Royal Medical Wing, and screens displayed warnings about a possible outbreak of Ventraxian fever, a disease that was highly contagious and extremely dangerous to Vexery. Physiology guards and servants rushed toward the medical wing in panic, leaving their posts unattended throughout the palace. J1 smiled in the darkness as he heard the distant sound of running feet and shouting voices. The distraction was working perfectly. He descended 3 levels using maintenance shafts that the guards never bothered to monitor, and he emerged into a corridor that led directly to Vault 7. 4 elite guards stood at the vault entrance. And these were not the careless soldiers he had encountered above. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons that could cut through steel. And they had been trained to protect the Queen's most valuable possessions. So one studied them for a long moment, calculating angles and distances in his mind. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device that Soo-min had constructed from stolen medical equipment. He pressed the activation button and rolled the device down the corridor toward the guards. A brilliant flash of light filled the hallway, blinding the guards for precious seconds. J1 was already moving before the light faded, and his body became a weapon of terrible efficiency. The first guard fell to a strike that crushed the breathing apparatus beneath his helmet. The second swung his weapon wildly, but J1 ducked beneath the blow and drove his elbow into the vulnerable joint where the armor met at the waist. The third and fourth guards attacked together, but J1 flowed between their strikes like water around stones, and in moments they too lay motionless on the ground. He stood alone before the vault door, breathing slightly harder, but otherwise showing no sign of the violence that had just occurred. His fingers entered the code he had memorized from the guards. Conversation 7-7-3-9-Alpha. The massive door slid open with a soft hiss, and J1 stepped inside to find exactly what the intelligence reports had described. 37 children huddled in cells along the walls of the vault, their faces pale with fear and malnutrition. They ranged in age from 4 years old to 15, and they all wore the same gray uniforms that marked them as specimens in the eyes of their captors. Many of them cried out in terror when they saw the dark figure enter the vault. Assuming that another experiment was about to begin, J1 raised his hands slowly, showing them that he carried no weapons. And then he signed the words that he hoped some of them would understand. "I am human." His hands told them in universal gestures, "I am here to take you home." A moment of silence passed, and then a small voice called out from one of the cells. "You talk like my sister," the voice said. And J1 turned to see a young girl of perhaps 7 years standing at the front of her cell. Her name was Hyun. He would learn later. And she had not spoken a single word since the day she was captured 6 months ago. But she could understand sign language because her older sister was deaf. And she recognized the movements of J1's hands. "Your sister taught you well." J1 signed back to her. "Can you help me talk to the others?" Hyun nodded. and something like hope flickered in her dark eyes for the first time in many months. J1 began opening the cells one by one, and Hyun translated his signed instructions into spoken words for the children who could not understand. "We have to be very quiet," she told them in a voice barely above a whisper. "This man came to save us, but we have to be brave and follow him without making any noise." The children gathered together in the center of the vault, holding hands and trying not to cry. And J1 looked at them with a fierce protectiveness burning in his heart. These were his people, the sons and daughters of humanity, and he would die before he let any harm come to them. He led them out of the vault and into the corridor, stepping over the unconscious guards without explanation. They had made it perhaps 50 meters when the alarms changed from medical alerts to security warnings. The Queen's voice echoed through the palace speakers, cold with fury and disbelief. "Find the silent human," she commanded. "He has stolen my specimens, and I want him brought to me alive." Her voice dropped to a hiss that promised unimaginable cruelty. "I want to hear him scream." J1 looked back at the 47 children who depended on him, and then he looked forward toward the path that would lead them to freedom. The hunt had begun, and the silent man was now the most wanted person on the entire planet. The service tunnels beneath the palace were dark and narrow, and J1 led the children through the winding passages with careful speed. He had memorized this route from fragments of conversation he had overheard, from maps he had glimpsed on guard terminals, from every small piece of information he had gathered during his time as a silent observer. Older children helped carry the younger ones, and Hyun stayed close to J1 and translated his signed commands to the others. "We have to keep moving," she whispered to a boy who had started to cry. "The quiet man says we are almost there." Above them, the palace had erupted into chaos as hundreds of guards searched every corridor and chamber for the escaped prisoners. The Queen's fury could be heard, echoing through the communication systems, and her threats grew more violent with each passing minute. J1 paused at an intersection and pressed his ear against the wall, listening for the sound of footsteps on the other side. He signed to Hyun that they needed to wait, and she passed the message back to the others in a soft voice. 10 seconds passed, then 20, and then the footsteps faded into the distance. They continued forward through the tunnels until they reached a heavy door that led to the palace docking bay. J1 entered a code that he had stolen from a maintenance worker's conversation, and the door slid open to reveal a vast chamber filled with ships of every size and design. The human diplomatic vessel sat at the far end of the bay, and J1 felt hope surge in his chest at the sight of it, but that hope died quickly when he saw what waited. Between them and the ship, Queen Sithara stood in the center of the docking bay with 50 elite guards arrayed behind her, their weapons raised and ready to fire. Her 4 eyes blazed with hatred as she watched the silent human emerge from the tunnel, with her precious specimens clustered around him. "Did you truly believe you could escape?" she asked in a voice that dripped with contempt. "Did you think that a broken, voiceless creature could outsmart the ruler of 1,000 worlds?" J1 pushed the children behind him and faced the Queen without fear showing on his face. "Look at you," Sithara continued as she slithered closer. "You cannot even beg for your life, cannot even plead for mercy, because you lack the basic ability to speak." She laughed, and her guards laughed with her, filling the docking bay with the sound of their cruel amusement. "My scientists will enjoy studying you," the Queen promised. "They will take you apart piece by piece to understand what makes humans so pathetically weak." J1 reached slowly into his pocket, and the guards tensed with their weapons aimed at his heart, but he did not pull out a weapon. Instead, he withdrew a small translation device and attached it to his throat, pressing a button that activated its circuits when he began to sign. The device converted his gestures into spoken words that echoed through the docking bay in a calm and steady voice. "You made a mistake. Your Majesty." The device spoke for him as his hands moved with precise deliberation. "You looked at my silence and saw weakness. But you should have looked more carefully." The Queen's eyes narrowed with surprise at hearing him communicate. But she quickly recovered her composure. "Pretty tricks," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "But tricks will not save you from what is coming. I have been watching you since the moment I arrived." J1 continued through his signs and the translation device. "I read the lips of your guards, and I memorized every secret they spoke." He took one step forward, and something in his posture made the guards shift nervously. "I know about the bribes you paid to the Galactic Council," he continued. "I know about the ships you have hidden in the outer systems. And I know about every species you have enslaved and every law you have broken." Queen Sithra's scales rippled with the first hint of uncertainty. "While you were busy mocking me, my partner was uploading all of this evidence to every major network in the galaxy." J1 sighed. "Right now, 100 worlds are learning the truth about the Vexary Dominion." "You are lying," the Queen hissed. But her voice wavered slightly. "Check your communications if you do not believe me," J1 suggested. "Or perhaps you already have. And you know that I am telling the truth." One of the Queen's advisors rushed forward and whispered urgently in her ear. And J1 watched her face transform from disbelief to horror to absolute rage. "You have destroyed everything," she screamed at him. "My alliances are crumbling, and the Galactic Council is already demanding my arrest." She raised her hand and pointed at J1 with murder in her eyes. "Kill them all," she commanded her guards. "Kill every human in this bay and let the galaxy know what happens to those who challenge the Vexary Dominion." The guards raised their weapons and prepared to fire on the unarmed man and the 47 children. Huddled behind him, J1 did not move. And he did not show fear. And his hands formed one final message. "You should not have threatened the children," he signed. "That was your last mistake." A massive explosion tore through the docking bay doors, and a ship painted in the colors of the United Earth military burst through the flames with weapons blazing. The human diplomatic vessel had never been a diplomatic vessel at all. It had always been a wolf in sheep's clothing. A rapid response warship disguised as a peaceful craft. Waiting for exactly this moment, the guards scattered as plasma fire rained down upon them. And soldiers in human combat armor poured out of the ship with weapons raised. Queen Sithara turned to flee, but she found her path blocked by a wall of armed humans, who showed no mercy in their eyes. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. And when it was over, the Queen of the Vexary Dominion knelt in chains on the floor of her own docking bay. She looked up at J1, with hatred burning in every one of her 4 eyes. "You will pay for this," she promised in a voice thick with venom. "The Vexary will never forget this insult, and we will hunt your species to extinction." J1 walked toward her slowly, and for the first time, he let her see the cold steel that had always been hiding behind his silent facade. His hands moved, and the translation device spoke his final words to her. "You took our children," he signed. "You called us weak and broken and inferior. But now you kneel before a silent man while your empire burns around you." He leaned close to her face and let her see the truth in his eyes. "Remember this moment when you sit in your prison cell," he told her. "Remember that the creature you mocked brought down everything you built. And he did it without speaking a single word." The rescue ship lifted away from the Vexary homeworld as fires burned across the capital city below. And J1 stood at the observation window, watching the planet grow smaller in the distance behind him. Medical teams worked to examine each of the 47 children, checking their health and treating the minor injuries they had suffered during their captivity. Dr. Kang Su-min moved among them with gentle hands and a warm smile, speaking softly to calm their fears and promising them that they were finally Safe the children would need time to heal from what they had experienced. J1 knew that they were young and resilient and surrounded by people who would help them recover. He felt a small hand tug at his sleeve, and he looked down to find Hyun standing beside him with her dark eyes fixed on his face. She had not spoken since the escape from the palace. Returning to the silence that had protected her during her months of captivity, but her hands moved in the signs that her deaf sister had taught her so many years ago. "How did you learn?" she asked him in the language of gestures. "How did you become so strong without using your voice?" J1 knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers, and he considered her question carefully before he answered. "I was not always strong," he signed back to her. "When I was young, people looked at me and saw only what I could not do, and they never imagined what I might become." Hyun watched his hands with intense concentration, understanding every movement and gesture. "I decided that their opinions did not matter," J1 continued. "I decided that I would find my own kind of strength, my own way of speaking to the world." "Was it hard?" Hyun asked. "Very hard," J1 admitted. "There were days when I wanted to give up, when the silence felt like a prison instead of a choice." He reached out and placed his hand gently on top of her head. "But I learned something important," he signed with his other hand. "I learned that the people who underestimate us are giving us a gift, because they never see us coming until it is too late." A small smile flickered across Hyun's face, the first smile anyone had seen from her since her rescue. "Will you teach me?" she asked with hope shining in her eyes. "Will you teach me how to be strong like you?" J1 smiled back at her and nodded. "You are already strong," he signed. "You survived 6 months in that terrible place, and you helped me save all of the other children with your translations." He stood up and looked around at the rescued children who filled the medical bay, some sleeping and some talking quietly with the medical staff. Strength is not about fighting or silence or never being afraid, he signed as Hyun watched his hands carefully. Strength is about getting up every time you fall down, about protecting the people who need you, about never giving up no matter how dark things become. 3 weeks later, the rescue ship arrived at Earth to a welcome that none of them would ever forget. Thousands of people had gathered at the spaceport. Parents and siblings and friends who had believed for 6 months that their loved ones were lost forever. Children walked down the ramp one by one, and cries of joy echoed across the landing field as families were reunited at last. J1 watched from the ship's doorway as Hyun ran into the arms of a young woman who looked just like her, the deaf sister who had taught her sign language so many years ago. The sisters held each other and cried, their hands moving in rapid signs that spoke of love and relief and the promise to never let go. Again, Ambassador Chung approached J1 with a complicated expression on his face, somewhere between gratitude and exasperation. "You could have told me the truth about the mission," he said. "I spent 3 weeks believing I was on a diplomatic assignment while you were planning an infiltration operation." J1 shrugged and signed his response, and Su-min translated for the ambassador. "If you had known the truth, you would have acted differently." She spoke J1's words. "The mission required that everyone believe we were genuine diplomats, including our own people." The ambassador sighed, but nodded in understanding. "The Galactic Council has issued a warrant for Queen Sithra's arrest," he reported. "The evidence you gathered has exposed corruption that reaches across a dozen systems, and the Vexury Dominion is facing sanctions that will take decades to recover from." He looked at J1 with new respect in his eyes. "You accomplished more in 3 days than our diplomatic corps has achieved in 3 years, he admitted. "I suppose I should learn to never underestimate the quiet ones." 6 months after the rescue, J1 stood at the front of a classroom in a school for children with disabilities on the outskirts of Seoul. 20 students sat before him. Some deaf and some mute and some with other conditions that the world often saw as limitations. Sheyun sat in the front row, her eyes bright with attention as she watched his hands move. Today we have a visitor, Jae-won signed to the class, and Soo-min translated for those who could not understand sign language. A tall alien with blue skin and 6 arms entered the classroom, and the students stared with wonder at the strange creature before them. This was Ambassador Rex of the Melindri Collective, a species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and ancient wisdom. The ambassador had requested this meeting specifically, traveling across the galaxy to ask a single question. I have studied the reports of what you did on the Vexury homeworld, Rex said through a translation device, and I have come to understand something that puzzles me about your species. He turned to face the classroom full of children with conditions that other species would consider defects. Why do humans value those who are different? He asked, why do you invest so much in protecting and educating those who cannot contribute in the same ways as others? Jae-won considered the question for a long moment, and then his hands began to move. Soo-min translated his signs into spoken words that filled the classroom. Because we learned long ago that strength has many voices. She spoke his message. We learned that the ones who see the world differently often see things that others miss. He gestured at the students around him, at the children who face challenges every day that most people could not imagine. These children are not broken. He continued through his signs. They are not lesser, and they are not weak. He looked directly at the alien ambassador with absolute conviction in his eyes. They are human, he signed. And that means they carry within them the same fire that has always driven our species forward. The fire to overcome every obstacle and reach every star. Ha-Yun raised her hand and signed something that made Jae-won smile with pride. Soo-min translated for the ambassador. She says that the strongest voices in the universe are often the ones that never make a sound. Soo-min spoke the young girl's words, and she would know because she was saved by one. Ambassador Rex looked around the classroom at the faces of the children, at the silent teacher who had brought down an empire, and at the future of a species that refused to leave anyone behind. I believe I understand now, he said softly. Thank you for teaching me. Outside the window, the sun shone down on a world that had learned to see strength in every form it could take. And in that classroom, a man who had never spoken a word in his life continued to teach lessons that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.